Once again, to everyone who's here, good morning and welcome to the 2020 State of the County and Public Safety Awards. I'm Scott Brodbeck, founder, editor, and publisher of arlnow.com. Our program will begin today with an address by Arlington County Board Chair Libby Garvey on the state of the county. Following Chair Garvey's remarks, I will moderate a question and answer session during which Chair Garvey will have the opportunity to answer a few questions that were provided to her in advance. Before we begin, it is my pleasure to first welcome another Scott, our Chamber Director and External Affairs Manager of Dominion Energy, our keynote speaker, to introduce Chair Garvey.
Thanks, Scott. Good morning, everybody. Libby Garvey began her professional career as a teacher in the Peace Corps in the Central African Republic. She later served on the Arlington School Board for 15 years, including 5 times as chair. Ms. Garvey was elected to the Arlington County Board in March 2012, and her colleagues unanimously selected her as chair of the Arlington County Board in 2020. Throughout her career, Ms. Garvey has been involved in many community organizations, including establishing the Keenan Garvey Memorial Fund for Phoenix Bikes in memory of her husband, and is currently serving on their board. Ms. Garvey also serves on other regional groups. An Arlington resident since 1977, Ms. Garvey has 2 daughters, both graduates of Arlington Public Schools, and 5 grandchildren, the oldest of whom is a Wakefield High School graduate this month. Please join me in welcoming, with a clap emoji in the chat, the 2020 Chair of the Arlington County Board, the Honorable Libby Garvey.
Thank you. Thank you to both Scotts, and thank you everybody for being here, to the Chamber for holding this annual event. I'm really honored to be able to address you today, and really pleased that we're going to be honoring our safety personnel afterwards. I look forward to that. This is a very difficult time for our county and the nation. People often ask me today, how are you doing? And they ask me in a way that they look at me and I can tell they really want to know. So just saying, fine, isn't going to cut it. And if you want a short answer to how I'm doing, it is, considering everything, I'm doing pretty well. And the same short answer applies to the county. How's the county doing? Considering everything, Arlington County is doing pretty well. Why? Well, there are a lot of reasons I will discuss this morning, but one of the major reasons is the quality of the people in our community, both within and outside of our government. I'm really grateful every day for organizations like the Chamber and our help with communications, and how a lot of businesses have been stepping up to help throughout this pandemic. I am grateful for our nonprofits and the thousands of residents who stepped up as volunteers to help. Your county board is a strong team. We're down 1 member. We miss Eric Gutschall every day, but we're a strong team. And then finally, and not least, I've always known that we have great people working for the county, but now I'm sure we have absolute rock stars. From our manager to our emergency team, our police chief, our department heads, they're all incredible and stepping up in amazing ways, and they've got great teams of people under them. We continue to be incredibly lucky here in Arlington. Now, before I get to the state of the county today, I'd like us all to remember briefly the before times, before we got to COVID. So let's all think back just about 5 months to January. Okay, everybody there? I imagine everybody here this morning, we were all making business plans that included the expected Amazon effect. Your Arlington County government was too. As incoming chair of the board, I was looking forward to what I anticipated being the easiest budget I had had in 25 years of doing school and county budgets. We'd begun our work sessions. One of the issues we were about to consider was body-worn cameras for our police. And one of my biggest concerns back then was setting up and starting a series of events to commemorate Arlington's 100th anniversary. I wanted us to be able to reflect on our past, warts and all, and then really think about where we wanted to go. And in my chair's remarks, I set out 3 focus areas that I thought could help guide us through 2020. They were equity, innovation, and resilience. By March, remember March? The manager was calling his proposed budget an quaint artifact of history. Our focus had become making sure everyone had enough to eat and a place to live. And we were trying to find ways for our economy, especially our small businesses, to survive. All the gaps in what passes for a healthcare system in the United States today opened wide. We went from focusing on issues like creating arts districts, expanding our parks, to focusing on the most basic needs of food, shelter, and health. And over the past months, we've all seen how our most vulnerable are the least able to quarantine, the least able to work from home, or to survive in an economy in free fall. And while it was increasingly clear how much race played into all of this, on May 25th, the issue of pandemic racism and how toxic it is hit us in the face hard with that horrifying video of George Floyd's murder by police in Minneapolis. What has been so clear to Black people throughout this nation's history became clear to the entire world. It's not a pretty picture. So here we are. Considering everything, we're doing pretty well. So throughout this pandemic, the one number we've been focusing on and really kind of able to reliably track from the very beginning has been the number of hospitalizations for COVID here in Arlington, and those cases have been declining. Our hospital system capacity is holding steady, and the shutdowns and closures that we have all been suffering through have been working. And we join, however, everyone in mourning the loss of our Arlingtonians from COVID. So now we've just entered phase 2 of reopening. Our metrics continue to trend in the right direction. We've got a good system of contact tracing set up, and we're fairly sure we've got a good supply of personal protective equipment, or PPE. It is, however, crucial everybody continue to practice distancing and wear face coverings as much as possible as we begin to go about our public lives. Now, I've been staying in close touch with my regional counterparts. Viruses, of course, pay no attention to borders, and we all know what happens in one part of the region will affect us here in Arlington. And I think one of the silver linings of this crisis has been increased cooperation and coordination around the region. And since May 25th, like so many others, we've begun engaging with our community over policing policies. While many of the demands we are hearing around the country are for practices that we long ago adopted here in Arlington, we're not perfect. And our goal should always be to be a model for the nation. So we are looking at what we need to do to get there, not because we have a crisis, but because we should all demand nothing less than being the best. Our police are innovative, and they've created approaches in the past. They're now used by forward-thinking departments around the country. But innovation, of course, never stops. I think we may well want to try some different approaches to keeping our community safe that will work better for everyone. Racial justice, of course, is about far more than policing. In fact, I first ran for the school board in 1995, calling for equity in our school system. And I worked on that for the entire 15 years I was on the school board. We still have far to go, but we did make progress. Equity requires persistence and hard, often uncomfortable work. I was very pleased to see our manager set up an interdepartmental group in January that has been looking at racial equity issues within our county government. A few days ago, I joined about 500 of our employees in a conversation about racial issues with the steering group. I was impressed, but not surprised, at the caring, the depth of thought, and the emotional intelligence of that conversation. Looking ahead, my 3 focus areas, equity, innovation, and resilience, remain central, and all 3 are connected. If you're not familiar with the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities project, you should check it out. They took 100 cities from around the world, from Accra, Ghana to Wellington, New Zealand, and they looked at what was the biggest threat to their survival, both from a critical event and from a chronic problem. 2 themes emerged from every city around the world. One was the threat of climate change, and the second was the danger of inequity and division. Boston, Massachusetts, for example, decided that racism was their biggest threat. because their community is so divided, it couldn't come together well in a catastrophe like a large hurricane. A city cannot be resilient if it does not have equity. So, what do my 3 focus areas and the twin pandemics of COVID and racism mean for us in Arlington today? Well, equity's first. As a community, we must commit to an Arlington where progress benefits everyone, not just some. The decisions we make going forward must be measured against the answers to the 4 questions we set out in our equity resolution in December. Who benefits? Who's burdened? Who's missing? And how do we know? As we gradually reopen, we must think also about how we can be a more just and equitable community, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the economically smart thing to do. So, as many of you know, we recently launched a small business grant, emergency grant program to aid Arlington small businesses, those with 50 or fewer employees. Those hit hard by the pandemic. More than 1,100 businesses applied. 63% of those applicants identified as woman or minority owned. With our existing funds, we can provide grants to 152 businesses. That's only 20% of those eligible to receive a grant. With an additional 1.6 million, we could provide grants to a total of 400 businesses. More than 50% of those that have applied that were eligible. And I expect the board will be looking at how we can do that in the very near future. News alert, you might want to tune into our meeting later today. And we again appreciate the Chamber's partnership with us to get the word out. You helped with a webinar that provided an overview of how to apply the grant program and there was a great turnout, several hundred participants. Our Biz Launch program has hosted several outreach events to celebrate and support our communities of color. We've also been working closely with the Federal Small Business Administration and with the Commonwealth to ensure equity in contracting with the county. We want everyone to get through this pandemic and economic crisis so we can quickly recover. That helps make us resilient. Now, innovation is the second area of focus. Innovation is a way of thinking that removes barriers to finding solutions to problems. Or, to quote an old proverb, necessity is the mother of invention. COVID-19 has forced us to change our approach to public health, public safety, business, education, how we communicate, how we interact with each other, all of which I believe have needed changing for a very long time. I truly believe this pandemic crisis gives us a great opportunity to make long-needed changes and come out of this a much stronger community, more equitable, more innovative, and more resilient. We have found new ways to communicate, like this meeting this morning. This breakfast is great, and new ways to engage with our community. Using Facebook Live for weekly town halls, we've been distributing flyers in multiple languages so we can keep residents informed about food, housing, and health resources. And when some property owners refuse to let us distribute those flyers in their buildings, we put out yard signs in the medians in multiple languages, telling people where they could get help. Our tech staff has built an interactive COVID-19 online dashboard to provide the latest updates. To support our restaurants, we approved an administrative process to allow temporary outdoor seating areas, TOSAs, and beyond what is already permitted. And I think we're looking at doing more along those lines as well. We have designated outside pickup zones for restaurants, and we were able to implement this within 1 business day during the pandemic early on. Our mapping center has rolled out a mapping tool for people that shows outdoor dining locations around the county. So these are just a few of the innovations we've stood up quickly during this crisis. And I suspect some here today are wondering why we could not have been so nimble and flexible before COVID. Well, as we continue on our path to recovery and well beyond, we can continue to use these innovations. Again, I think we will come out of this pandemic better than ever. Finally, our third focus area is resilience. It's important to remember that Arlington has a history of resilience. It was amazing how fast we grew and adapted back in the 1940s during the buildup of government and the military during World War II. The early days of World War II were also a dark day for our nation. More recently, we recovered from the 9/11 attacks. We made it through the BRAC process that hit Arlington harder than any other community in the nation. We also got through the Great Recession and sequestration. We pulled through it all, and we will pull through COVID-19 together. And I think we're going to be a stronger community because of it. But it will not be easy. There's no part of our business community, or indeed our whole community, that has not been impacted by COVID. I think many of us know the impact on our restaurants. Based on meals tax collections, March restaurant activity was down more than 60% from last year. A number of restaurants have pivoted, and they've done carry out and takeout and delivery service, but receipts are still down 50% from earlier. Our tourism and hospitality industry have been hit probably the hardest. A quarter of our hotels are closed since March. April's hotel occupancy and revenue were down about 90% from last year. The pandemic has resulted in layoffs and furloughs for many of the 27,000 hard-working employees in Arlington's hotels, restaurants, and businesses, and many of them have turned to Arlington County for help with food and housing. So the picture right now is dark for many, and uncertainty lies ahead for all. Yet the resiliency I have seen in our community over the last 3 months makes me confident that we will recover from this crisis. Throughout human history, cities have suffered with pandemics, and cities have always come back. Some things about the human species are not going to change. Humans are social, and they're curious. They are not going to stop traveling forever, and they're not going to isolate forever. And perhaps most importantly for us here in Arlington, we are far better positioned than most to get through this pandemic. While Arlington's corporate community is certainly feeling the impact of COVID-19, we're fortunate to have a diverse economy. The federal, professional services, and technology sectors are faring far better than some others. We've been focusing in recent years on tech companies and cybersecurity, which are some of the most able to work remotely and have the most demand for their services. Indeed, we are hearing from many of our office tenants that they have been able to maintain their operations successfully in a virtual format. I think many people are discovering the very real benefits of not commuting. And we are finding some of that our own county offices are more efficient than they were before, and our employees more satisfied with the way they can adjust their work schedules to their family demands. Let's face it, 9 to 5 is a real 20th century concept. It hasn't worked for our 21st century lives for a very long time. So while we're seeing a slowdown in corporate moves, interest in Arlington as a business location continues. Our fundamentals of talent, location, and transportation are solid, and they will withstand this pandemic. We have a well-educated and a well-connected workforce. This continues to be a great place to live, work, and play, and people continue to need to live, work, and play. Development continues. We have more than 2 million square feet of office space under construction, eclipsing the 1.4 million square foot mark, which we set in 2012. Amazon broke ground on the first phase of HQ2. We continue to have site plans and permits coming to the Planning Commission and the board. And we have a broad vision. We keep an eye on what's happening around the world. In January, our emergency team saw what was happening in China and began adding to our already robust supply of emergency supplies of protective gear. In March, we began to hunt literally worldwide for testing capability. And this has been a long and frustrating effort, but we have stood up 2 testing sites, and we're hopeful to have reliable and easily accessible testing for anyone who wants and needs it soon. Another strength we have is our long-standing safety net. When we need to feed more residents, organizations like AFAC and Meals on Wheels are there already. We didn't have to invent them, we just needed to grow them. Volunteer Arlington was already there as a clearinghouse when we needed more volunteers. Our Department of Human Services and the nonprofit Thrive have always helped people with rent assistance. We increased their resources. And as we try to set up testing and care for our most vulnerable, the Arlington Free Clinic is already there to support us. Arlington Public Schools have always provided food to needy students when schools are closed. And where APS has fallen short during this pandemic, the PTAs have partnered with each other across the county, stepped up, and provided bags of groceries to hundreds of families every week. And around the county, individuals are forming new groups to try to help. One of the major silver linings, I'd call it even a golden lining, to this cloud has been seeing the incredible generosity and community spirit from those in this room and across our community. So in closing, I need to point out that this pandemic is not a critical event. It is a chronic condition that we will be dealing with for some time. Crises tend to bring out both the best and the worst in people. And I often remind myself that a crisis is also an opportunity. In Arlington, I've been seeing some of the best coming out, and that allows us to seize a very real opportunity here. We have an incredible opportunity to come through this crisis much more equitable, much more resilient than before. But we've got to innovate to get through the barriers to our thinking that have prevented us from having a way to get good health care to everyone. Because if we don't, this virus will come roaring back. It turns out that our most vulnerable workers are also essential. They're the ones we depend on for food, health and childcare, personal grooming, and more. And if they get sick, we get sick. We also need to remove the barriers to our thinking that have prevented us from making sure everyone has enough food to eat and a place to live. If we don't, we could literally have thousands of people and their families on the street looking for food. And that is not going to be good for anyone. So whether or not you think the solution to this is government's role to play or the economy's to work out, I think we can all agree that lots of hungry, sick people on the street will make us all sick and is very bad for our economy. It's a lesson I hope our entire nation will figure out. It's staring us right in the face. But for the moment, we're pretty darn good shape here in Arlington, and we're getting through this pandemic. As we begin to get through the critical phase of COVID-19 and get into the chronic phase, and as we get into the issue of chronic inequity that's been around as a plague forever, I look forward to working with everyone to figure out the innovations we need to make sure that Arlington becomes even more resilient and more ready to move forward into our next 100 years. I cannot think of a better community to be with right now than Arlington County. So I appreciate all the support from the people in this virtual meeting and the tremendous communications effort the Chamber's been making. I look forward to questions and then to recognizing our public safety personnel who are on the front lines for us every single day. Thank you. All right, Scott, you've got some questions for me.
Yes, thank you, Libby. We will now move on to the Q&A portion. And the first question I have here is, a year ago, the question and answer session began with the assertion that Arlington seems poised for continued growth over the next decade. How do you believe that the coronavirus has impacted our growth prospects?
Okay, so it's impacted us. Certainly, it's impacted us like everybody else and slowed things down. But as I made in my remarks, as I stated, I think that we're in really good shape. And we really are poised to continue to grow once the whole world, frankly, starts to shake off this pandemic. With further easing of restrictions, I think the restaurant sales are going to go up, but of course they're going to stay down. I think it's quite possible we'll never quite get back to the same kind of dining out that we used to do. And I think our sectors are really faring much better than a lot of the more traditional sectors I mentioned. And as I said, diversity really does bring does bring strength to us. So I think we're doing pretty well, and we're poised to continue to grow. This is a bump in the road, but as I say, I think we're going to use this, I hope, to reform, look more at what we're doing, and instead of just charging forward, we're going to think about it, and I hope have a much more secure base as we do it. So I continue to be confident, but we're going to be through some rough times for a while.
Okay, so on to the second question. Shifting from the long run to the more immediate term, let's focus on the remainder of 2020. What do you see as the most critical roles for local government to guide Arlington's recovery from the shock of the past 3 months? And how do you envision the county board leading to guide this response?
So I think really what we've been doing in some ways, keeping track of as we move forward, that the situation keeps changing. And so we are continuing to try to help our community get through and adapt to the new kind of rules of doing things. One of the things we did, for example, was order tens of thousands of masks so we can start distributing them. And so anybody anywhere in Arlington that finds himself without a mask, there's going to be one for them to get, and to help our all of our various facilities and buildings, both private and public, and our nonprofits have enough sort of face coverings, which is one of the crucial things we need to be doing. We're going to continue to try to show flexibility as much as we can in our regulatory systems to get through things. And as I mentioned, we're also working on getting testing. And I think as we are, can step up and do more of that, the better off we will be. Communication is absolutely crucial. As the situation keeps changing, I think all of us are finding, you think you've got it figured out, and the next day something else happens, or maybe that afternoon something happens, and suddenly what you figured out doesn't work anymore. So there are really a lot of things that we can continue to do that we will work on. And also, I think we are, as I mentioned earlier, trying to get the testing. I really think we are continuing to position ourselves for a new world that we're in. And looking forward, it is communities where people feel safe, where they feel like people are wearing masks. So they are wearing masks in business establishments, and they see their separation, that people are conscious of it. The more secure and safe people feel in a community, the better that community is going to be. And as we get more testing and the contact tracing ability, and really get clearly a control over this virus, that will continue to position us to be stronger and will help our entire economy and everybody in the county.
Okay. So Arlington was set to embark on a missing middle housing study this spring before the pandemic pushed it back. What are your goals for this study? And do you have an estimate of when you expect it to start back up again, and when we're likely to have results?
So the goals were to examine, and are to examine still, although it kind of feels like a long time ago that we started talking about this. The goals are to examine how and whether new housing types could be introduced in Arlington to increase the diversity and the supply of housing that we've got. And during the first phase of the study, the staff's going to be working with the community to develop a shared understanding of the problem. I think there's some disagreement about what really the problem is and what the solution might be. And really get into community concerns and preferences. There's a lot of sort of misunderstanding and fear out there because of the possibility of change, which I think is unsettling to people. So that we need to really be kind of deliberate about it, which we're doing. Staff is going to start out with putting out a research compendium with sort of 5 different areas, and they're going to start rolling that out. Hopefully, we're aiming to get the first one out June 22nd. So we'll see if we make that. It could be delayed a little bit. But the different areas we're going to be looking at in this study. So it's first a study. Before we come up with solutions, we're going to kind of really study and get our heads around what's going on, and some community consensus about really what the situation is and what the options are. So those areas are looking at Arlington's housing market, trends in housing and relevant demographic information, Arlington's housing inventory, and what the existing middle housing and what other kind of types, what it is that we have, do a good survey. Look at Arlington's land use and zoning history, which affects things quite a bit. And then also look at policy areas beyond housing and land use planning that guide Arlington's development. So we're continuing to move ahead with that. It hasn't been on the top of, I will say, my mind lately, but our staff is working on it. We've got a general concept. We're going to get the community kind of up to speed and get us all really on the same page. That includes the board as well with this study. And then we'll move forward to what that might indicate for us to do to see if there's some better ways to provide more housing in Arlington.
Okay. I have two more questions.
Okay.
The first is, can you elaborate on what the county is doing to address the very important issues of racial justice and police reform?
Sure.
Particularly what changes might be coming to Arlington's law enforcement?
Well, I'll first do a little advertisement. We've just announced we're going to be doing a town hall or a listening session on Thursday from 6 to 8 for people to come and talk to us about what they are thinking and feeling. We are going to be setting up a group to look at the various issues that have been brought forward. I really think the board has met with the NAACP, was it last week or maybe even the week before? All the weeks are moving quickly. We met with the NAACP talking about what their issues were. And I think we're going to be looking at doing a citizen review board. Those are in a lot of places. We have some things kind of like that. Certainly, commissions and review boards are very Arlington. I think that is something that we likely will set up. As I mentioned, we're going to be looking at body-worn cameras. The manager is going to be presenting a proposal for those later today when he makes his CIP, presents his CIP. So I think we're going to be looking at that and holding a lot of discussions. And I think, as I said, it's not just about policing, and our police really are very, they are innovative. They've got a lot of good training. They have told us that one of the issues that's hardest for them is dealing with mental health crises, which is very understandable. 75% of them are trained in how to handle those crises, but they're still difficult. Perhaps there's a different model to use. Some places are doing that. So I think we're going to be looking at all of that and working it through with our community. And I'm hoping to have a really good community discussion. There are a lot of people that are really paying attention now and paying attention to local government in a way that they never have before. And it's, again, a real opportunity to communicate with people and get us all kind of understanding what it is local government does, what we're doing now, and how we can get better. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and my understanding is there might be more to come at the board meeting tonight.
Yes, exactly.
Everybody should watch that. So we have one.
Yeah, that's the body-worn cameras, and maybe something else.
Yeah,
we'll see.
We will see. We will be reporting on that.
Yeah.
One last question. One of the Chamber's local policy positions is a call for the county to continue to work towards instilling an emphasis on business attraction and accommodation through its organizational culture. And that's a quote. That's a direct quote.
Yeah.
County government recently has taken more steps to be flexible and accommodating for business needs. For example, the temporary outdoor seating areas, TOSAs, which is, I like the acronym, for restaurants.
I'm glad you like it. It's going to be here for a while.
What can Arlington County learn from this experience, and how do you want to see local government work with local business in the future?
Well, I think we're reinventing it right now as we go. The way we arranged for sidewalk pickup and things like within one day, that was great. And I think the need to move quickly is allowing us to kind of take some steps that we might not have taken before, and as I say, make us better in the end. We're doing a lot of surveys. We've been doing a lot of surveys already, and we'll continue to kind of get the input. I've personally been meeting more with our chamber than I have in a long time, and continuing to get feedback, which is really important. We've already come up with some really good innovations. One of them I think is working well for absolutely everybody is this virtual home inspections. And I've been getting great reviews from that, from the people who do the inspections, from the people who have the inspections. And I think we can be doing more of that. Our manager started keeping a list, and I told him this is great, way back at the beginning of all of this, as we continue to find things that are working better this way than they've worked in the past. And we will continue to work with our business community and look at ways that are that we can do things more in a 21st century way, more flexibility. I think we may move to in our county offices. We can't all come back together again and socially distance in the way we were, kind of cheek to jowl in some of our offices. So we're probably going to spread it out. People can work from home more. Maybe we start opening up at like 6 in the morning, go till 9 at night. Maybe we have more Saturday off hours so that people can spread out, which could allow our workers to have more flexibility to deal with their own family situation, and also can then make us open for business and available to people kind of almost 24/7, not quite. But it should make us able to provide better services. So I think we're going to come out of this better and stronger than ever. We will continue to talk with each other and to try to innovate and not we don't have the mindset, at least I don't, that we're going to go back to the way it was. As I had said in my remarks, there's so much that we were doing that really just didn't make very much sense for a lot of us. And suddenly this pandemic has made it absolutely necessary to change. So we want to make sure that we use this crisis well, and we come through it, as I said, stronger and more resilient and more equitable than we were before. So I'm looking forward to it. We all need to get a little sleep and eat our Wheaties, though, because it's a long haul. But this is an exciting time, and as I say, this is a great community to be in doing this. And I thank the Chamber for all the support they're giving us as we're trying to adapt, and people's patience and understanding. Because when you innovate, you make mistakes sometimes, and you go back and redo it. But we're all working it through together, and together we'll get through it.
Okay. Thank you,
Anything
Libby.
else? Okay.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you for
All right. Well,
joining
thank
us
you so
this
much.
morning.